Victory, there is victory for us. Victory, there is victory.
Aluta, Victoria.
Gentlemen of the press, everybody of taxation in Abuja. Locally in Abuja, we would like to call
comrades and members of the press on minimum wage. We target minimum wage, maximum poverty. Despite the rising cost of living, the minimum wage has remained stagnant, and the 70,000 naira currently agreed upon by the organized labor and the government is far lesser than 15% of the minimum wage cost of living for workers in Nigeria. This was calculated to be 615 naira by the NSC as of May, 615,000 by the NSC as of May 2024. This has also left the workers struggling to afford essential like housing, food, healthcare, and education. The government's approach to the minimum wage negotiation has been dismal, insincere, and dismissive of the real struggle that the workers faced in our society. The minimum wage increments are often delayed or only partially fulfilled in Nigeria, and minimum wage negotiations are always marked by a lack of transparency and genuine engagement with the labor representatives. These negotiations also often exclude the representatives of the informal workers who contribute 70% of the country's GDP. It is noteworthy here to state that the present 30,000 minimum wage is not enough to buy a full tank of a fuel in most cars in the country, and the new 70,000 naira is grossly insufficient to live above the extreme poverty line. In September 2022, the World Bank pegged the global poverty line to $2.15 per day. Based on the present exchange, that means about 3,000 naira per day for the extreme poverty line. So consequently, 70,000 naira minimum wage is far below, and also is below the poverty line. We demand a living wage for the Nigerian workers. On the basis of the present inflation crisis, the minimum wage should not be below 250,000 naira.
Comrades and members of the press, African on the Rise solidarity to the Kenyan protesters. In recent months, we have seen that the Kenyans have been witnessing widespread of protests against a similar series of austerity measures imposed by the government. These measures are similar to those implemented in Nigeria. In Nigeria, we too have faced challenges that have tested our resilience and unity. We have seen power of collective action, the strength that lies in standing together, and the profound impact that our voice can have when raised in unison against injustice. The measures similar to those implemented in Nigeria include increase in tax, hike in cost of goods and services. Ordinary Kenyans have taken the streets to voice their opposition to the policies. The struggle in Nigeria and in Kenya are not isolated incidents, but are deeply interconnected. Both countries are grappling with devastating effects of neoliberal economic policy that prioritize austerities over human well-being. The fight against oppressive economic policies is a global one. Neoliberal policies characterized by deregulation and privatizations have been imposed on many countries and have led to similar patterns of inequality, poverty, and social unrest. This policy often benefits the small elite while marginalizing the majority. From Latin America to Europe to Africa, people are rising to challenge the status quo and demand economic policy that prioritize human dignity and social equality. The road to justice is often filled with obstacles, but in our shared history, our common struggle, and our unbreakable spirit, that is what will see us through. As we march forward, know that you are not alone. We stand with you, shoulder to shoulder, in the quest for a better Kenya, a better Nigeria, and a better Africa. Thank you.
Marxist, mass harvest for the ruling class. At this point, it is clear that the background of the excruciating pain and economic misery caused by the anti-people policies of the APC Tinubu government is so gross, so extreme, that it is wicked for any government to call for patience or sacrifice from the people at this point in time. Presently, they talk about patience and sacrifice from the masses can be contrasted when we consider that the Nigerian leaders who are misleading us and asking us to make sacrifice are actually continuing their plunder of this country and throwing us in further hardship. For instance, while Nigerians wallow in unimaginable economic mishap, the government officials mindlessly live affluently off the collective wealth of the nation, with billions spent on renovating the president and the vice president's residences in Lagos, renovation of the National Assembly complex, as well as procuring SUV vehicles worth 130 million naira each to members of the National Assembly. It is crystal clear that this is merely sacrifice for the masses and bountiful harvest for the ruling class. In fact, it is easy to say that we are the ones being sacrificed for the ruling class to keep being rich. And in a country like Nigeria, this is very important because since this call for protest has started, we have seen different calls by different indigenous groups in Lagos, Ohanese, Abuja indigenous groups, Arewa indigenous groups, saying that they are asking their people not to protest. We want to respond to this, and it is to say that all of us who are poor, the only division that exists in Nigeria presently is the division between all of us who are poor and those who are clearly rich and ruling us. And this is because despite their attempts to use tribe, region, religion, culture, and everything to divide us, we have seen clearly from the attempts that the attempts have been sponsored by our own governments. Our own government is attempting to use tribalism to divide us. And I will give you a clear example. Few days ago, some people came together and called themselves the indigenous Abuja inhabitants and called a press conference saying that a protest should not hold in Abuja, that they are against the protest. What we did was because interestingly, they made sure not to put their names, make their names available for that press conference, such that the names were not shown in that video. But we made sure to look for their faces. And we discovered that the person that led that press conference, his name is Bitrus Lawrence Garuki, who led that press conference, is an appointee by the APC Tinubu government and the Wike FCTA. And so we have a government that is directly, this is a crime in other parts of the world, a government that is directly stoking tribal war just because the people said they are protesting against hunger and hardship. The same thing is happening in Lagos. Some indigenous group came up and said that they are using the sacred Yoruba spirituality of the Horo tradition to say that we should not protest between that period. And I think we should make sure we note this, that the division of tribalism is being stoked by our government and not by the people who are protesting. The people who are protesting are united by hardship, hunger, poverty, which has become our national identity in Nigeria recently. To continue, the recent declaration of a 50% slash in the salaries of members of the legislative for 6 months is an insult on the collective intelligence of the masses. We know without doubt that the basic salary of members of legislative and government officials is less than 20% of their total take home. So slashing 20%, that means they are slashing 10% of their salaries. We believe that it is very deceitful to call that sacrifice when we know that this amounts to millions and millions of naira. This is a deceitful attempt to hoodwink the masses into believing that government officials are actually making sacrifices. And on that basis, we are demanding that if truly they want to make sacrifices and they're not just paying eye service, our government officials should be put on the same salary schemes with the average workers that is working for them in their offices. That is the demand of those of us who are part of this protest and are part of the mobilization for this process. Thank you very much.
Some members of the press. Tough time amidst collapse of social services. Things has been bad, but it has not been worse as this. I think government should lead us forward and not backwards. We have been led into retrogression in this country over the past few, months, that Tinubu has emerged as the president of this country. When the removal of subsidy on fuel was announced, the immediate chorus was that the fund will be diverted into social services like education, healthcare, palliative, provision, employment, and etc. Buses we have not yet seen. None of the palliatives have gotten to any of us. In the education sector, just like the health sector, it has been a continuation of the ruinous state that was obtainable before the emergence of the Tinubu administration. Within the 2023 and now, almost all the major tertiary institutions have exorbitantly increased their fees by an average of 200%. And people who manage to graduate at the end of the day has been reduced to nothing. Those that are opportune has been reduced to Uber drivers. Despite this, facilities needed to aid effective teaching and learning are either absent or are despicable in conditions. Instead of addressing this crisis by probably funding the education sector and ensuring the proper funding of the education sector, the government initiates a loan scheme. This is a scheme. This is a quality and unaffordable education to students. Besides, this loan scheme, which has become a reason for increment in fees by administrators, is largely unacceptable to a large percentage of the students. Also, in healthcare, is unacceptable to many Nigerians. Aside from the poor state of the health facilities are in poor condition. You can hardly access drugs in our government hospitals. Each Nigerian has to be paid to be born. It has become largely unacceptable to many Nigerians to have resort to self-medication and crowdfunding of hospital bills. Nigerians deserve quality and acceptable education and health care. And yet, our politicians, the corrupt elites, they steal public funds. They travel out for medications. They steal public funds and they rub it on our face. A politician buying an SUV of 55 million for his daughter who just graduated in a country where we cannot access paracetamol in our healthcare. We demand that all the school fees increase since May 29, 2023 should be reversed immediately. Thank you very much.
Comrades, members,
people of Abuja. That is the reason why we are identifying issues in Abuja, like the taxation issue, the housing issue. For example, the most obvious evidence that housing is a problem in Abuja, it is that housing is the most advertised thing on the billboards in Abuja when you move around Abuja. And this is because most of these houses have been taken over by rich real estate owners who prefer to have those estates empty than for our working people who deserve to have a house because they have a government who is constitutionally responsible to take care of their welfare and security. These workers who already operate under precarious economic conditions bear the brunt of the housing crisis. Housing has become commodified and accumulated by some, while others are homeless. This crisis is characterized by the recent demolitions and the threats of demolitions across Abuja. Exorbitant rents in every part of the city, and numerous empty estates in this capital city of Nigeria. An example, which is very personal, is that in a settlement that is very close, it's called Ido Village, very close to the Uni Abuja permanent site. I personally was part of the victims of a demolition in 2021, and again we moved further backwards, and again we have been threatened with demolition in Ido Village presently in 2020, since February. And these are the issues. The part of the land that was taken in 2021 is still undeveloped till now, but people have been displaced with no compensation since 2021. This is the reason why we feel this issue, which has led to homelessness and poor living conditions for many, is just not an housing issue. It is a systemic issue that has deep systemic roots, and for that reason it requires immediate attention and action. The urgency of addressing this crisis cannot be overstated because thousands of residents are being displaced further away from the city, where they now have to take more transportation to work at the city center, and they are forced into precarious living conditions in places where normal people should not be living, and subjected to economic and psychological stress because of high rents, demolitions, and the empty estates lying around unused because of the high cost of rent in the city. This city is dotted with numerous empty estates, properties that remain unoccupied, unused, while thousands are homeless and living in substandard conditions. This is an outright failure of our current housing policies and the lack of political will to address the needs of the people. On this basis, we demand an end to these oppressive practices and we call for the implementation of fair housing policies that prioritize the need of the people over profit and speculation. As a sort of recap, the aim of this protest is to address the hardship and hunger in Nigeria presently. But adding to that hunger and hardship is also an housing crisis in Abuja, where people have to, with 6 times of your salary, you will still be living far away at the outskirts of the town. And this is not something that should be obtainable in any country that is responsible to its citizens. We have also raised the fact that the sacrifice that the government claims to be making, they are not making any sacrifices. They are actually making us, the people, sacrifices for them to keep being rich. To move to the last section, protest is our democratic right. We stand with Nigerians, and the time for mass struggle is now. This might be the major part which is most controversial about this press conference, and it is that since the charter for a protest has started earlier this month, the federal government has come out in many ways to try to discourage us from protesting. Our parents did not fight against the military. They did not fight against the military, lose their lives fighting against the military just for us to come and lose the right to protest. Because the right to protest is the most sacrosanct part of democracy. In fact, many people who do not know about the fact that we are supposed to have a protest about hunger and hardship are going to be coming to this protest just because they are angry at the fact that they are telling us to not protest. Which equivocally states that Nigerians have the right to protest peaceful assembly, and free speech. No government, no matter the number of votes you got in an election, has the right to stop the people from dissenting. And what we've seen recently is that the government has been threatening, and they are saying that because of the issues of national security, that we should not embark on the protest, that they have intelligence, that some people want to hijack the protest and make it violent. Please, a responsible government, by now, if they are saying that since like 2 weeks ago, by now should have identified those people who want to cause violence and take them out of the space. And so that we that want to do peaceful protest can peacefully protest. But they are not doing that. Instead, they are asking us to not protest.
Meet all the demands in advance.
Now, the demands of our protest, the question is that in a democracy, I can decide I want to protest for anything. The demand of the protest should not be justified. So one of the arguments that they've been making is that our demands are not justified. Tinubu is still working. The demands of a protest does not have to be justified before we can have a protest. And so this is the point we are making. We are saying that if Nigeria is going to be a democracy, Nigerians, the government should be urging Nigerians to exercise their rights to be citizens of their country, which is their right to protest. Our government should understand that an unused right is an abused right. And so we are going to use our right to protest by August 1.
For our victory, there is victory for